What's up, Fiery 49 folks? Beautiful day here in Central Kentucky. We're down in Loretto, Kentucky, where I was born and raised, and got Fiery 49 out today. Having a great day. Got the storage dust knocked off, kind of cleaning things up, getting ready for St. Patty's Day parade. Got some uh, wiring issues fixed, different stuff. Uh, Things were going great, and I made the mistake of making a post looking for a floodlight to replace one we're missing since we bought the truck. And in that post, I mentioned it looks like most of our mechanical issues are behind us. Now we're working on the other stuff. And then, of course, got a mechanical issue that developed today. Drove the truck around some this morning, had no problems this afternoon. Was going to go run an errand with Fiery 49 and died at a stoplight, running just fine. And then it died and wouldn't restart. I thought we ran out of fuel because we don't have a working fuel gauge, but I was like, maybe it leaked out, have a leak. I was worried about it. Then I smelled gas, a lot of gas, and popped the hood, and fuel was streaming off and around the carburetor. Now, haven't done the diagnosis yet of what it exactly is leaking, but it looks like it was coming out to the air filter assembly, which I have removed that already. But it would have been sitting here on top of the carburetor, and based on how clean and varnished things are around here, it looks like it may have been coming out here from the throttle body. Likely a stuck float, I'm guessing. The truck was loading up very fuel rich. Did manage to get it restarted by opening the throttle and keeping RPMs up, but looks like fuel was dumping in. Probably there's a vent right here. That's a fuel bowl vent that goes down into where the fuel normally sits, but the fuel line comes in right here. Fuel from the fuel pump pumps in. It fills the bottom of the carburetor, and there's a float in there. And when there's plenty of fuel in the carburetor bowl, the float comes up and it basically pinches off the fuel line. And as fuel gets used up, the float drops down and fuel comes in. What I think is happening and what's fairly common is the little seal where the fuel comes in. If the float, either the seal goes bad and it can't stop the flow of fuel coming in and it keeps dumping fuel when it's not needed, or the float itself can get pinholes, get saturated, and the float can sink and won't float up and shut it off. So, going to try and figure out if it is the float or something else that was going on, but it's my guess it was the float based on what it looked like. There was fuel everywhere, indicating it likely was coming from here in the throttle body portion of the carburetor. So I'm actually going to try and start this up with the camera rolling and see if we can see how obvious it is. Now, if it's coming out of the bowl vent, we know what it is. It's a stuck float, but not that hard to fix this. There's just some screws on top. This carburetor pops apart in two pieces. We can likely fix it here in just a few minutes, but I'll make an attempt to start the truck back up just for a short period and confirm if it's a stuck float that's causing us the issues of the fuel leak here at the carburetor. All right, absolutely no doubt. You can see in the video, uh, too much fuel coming in the carburetor. Basically, the carburetor is being overrun with fuel. You can see the fuel running out of the vent tube right here and kind of seeping around other areas. So um, basically, the float or the needle and seat is not shutting off fuel to the carburetor when it should be. So the fuel pump's always pumping, but basically, when the float in here pops up, it should overcome the pressure of the fuel pump and not let the fuel flow in until the float sinks again, opens the needle and seat, and allows fuel back in. So we're flooding out because that's been overcome. Whether it's a bad float now, we've developed a pinhole, or it's saturated, or the needle and seat, I don't know yet. But we'll pop the tops off here and look in and figure out why we're dumping all this fuel and get us back to running again. What you see right here, I was just messing with it there. There's a bolt or another screw hidden under this cap. I've got to get it off to get the actual access to the float, but this is what you'd be would be called the step-up pump. So on a carbureted engine, when you give it throttle and try to get it off idle or going again, it needs to richen up the mixture a little bit so the engine doesn't stumble and takes off and accelerates. So this little pump right here, below here, basically when you step on the pedal, it gives a squirt of gas into the throttle body over here to give you quick throttle response and bring the engine RPM up. That's also carbureted vehicles. If you ever watched the old movies or seen the old clips where guys will pump it 2 or 3 times before they start it, this is the pump that would squirt extra fuel into the cold engine, and that would allow it to have a rich enough mixture to start on a cold day. All I'm trying to do right now is get the linkage clear back here so I can get the last screw out and pull the top of the tank off. All right, let's linkage out of the way. Take this off. And we're full of fuel. This is the float. So this sits in this is full of fuel down here. This sits in it, and it literally the float floats in the fuel. And when it comes up, it's supposed to cut off the fuel right here and not let it come in. The fuel line comes in here. I'll do my best to show this assembly. So back there, that's the bowl of the carburetor. That's full of fuel. That's the fuel line coming in that we disconnected. This sits on top. This is our step-up pump. This is what was squeezing. And when you step-up pump right here, this adds extra fuel. When you pump the pedal, puts a little extra juice into the carburetor so it doesn't stumble, richens the mixture. This is the float. This sits down in there and literally floats in the fuel. And when the fuel bowl is full, this comes up and shuts off the fuel from the fuel pump. And as you use fuel up, it drops down, opens the needle and seat in here, opens back up and lets fuel flow in. So either our float doesn't float anymore, or this needle and seat isn't getting a good seal when it gets pushed up and fuel is coming by. So we're going to go to the workbench and do a little more to figure out what's going on here. But there's your basic stuff inside the carb on an old single barrel. All right, the lighting is not the best in here. We're in the barn, in the workbench in the barn, but that's where we're at. This is what we have. I'll do my best to keep all this in frame here for you. So this is just a gasket. I've got a roll of gasket material. We'll make a new gasket for this. Our step-up pump seems to be working just fine, so I'm not worried about its operation, but you can see here how it moves up and down. And this, as it plunges in the carburetor, it puts additional fuel in. And this is the needle for the needle and seat for the jet. So this, as this moves up and down, it regulates the fuel mixture also. So when you're stepping on the throttle, all these pieces are moving in there to adjust the fuel mixture. But our problem is going to be either the float or the needle and seat in here, because this all seems to be working just fine. We just have a fuel flow problem. So this little pin here just pulls right out and the float will come off. Now we'll get some fuel in a second. We'll literally just get a cup of fuel. We'll see if the float still floats. But that little guy right there, that's the needle of the needle and seat. And then here's the seat. So I can take this out. We'll make sure we don't have any dirt or debris that has gotten in here that is keeping that from seating. And we'll check our seal. Looks like that gasket is probably still holding. And I won't be able to show it on camera, but the seat here, when I hold it up to a light bulb, I actually can see a piece of dirt inside there. So it may just be that dirt from the fuel tank got past the fuel pump, the sediment filter, and has gotten in there, corrosion in the line. So it looks to be actually a pretty good sized chunk in there. So we're going to clean out the seat here, and then we'll check to see if it's still sealing or not. All right, I'll do my best to have this focus, if the camera will focus. Come on, camera. Try right there on the end of my finger. That's just a little chunk of something. It's kind of stiff, kind of hard, and it was in there where the needle and seat made up. So I'm hoping all it was is that little chunk right there was keeping the seat from closing off, and that was causing our fuel problem. But what I'm going to check for now, I'm going to put my needle back down in the seat. They're in there. Just going to put a little pressure on it, just like it would have from the fuel pump, and see if it seals back up. Very scientific. I'm literally going to purse my lips around it and put a little pressure and see if it holds. And it does. So I think that was the problem. But we're still going to check the float just to make sure. And if the microphone picked up that noise, that was me gently blowing on the fuel intake here and letting the seat work and making sure that it would occlude it. And it is doing so. We'll check our float quickly with some fuel. All right, highly scientific here, but just to ensure our float does float, literally going to just take it, got some clean fuel in a kind of dirty bowl, but try to get this where the camera can see it. But if this was sitting in the carburetor bowl on that hinge, it's bottoming out, but it does appear it's a little better. But you can see there, as I move my hand, the float is hinging and the float is floating. And right there where it hits the needle of the seat, it will push up and should be closing that off. So I think we're fine. I think we just had some dirt in the needle and seat, and we'll be okay. I am going to push this tab up just a little bit, just to make it close a little earlier anyway. It's a very, 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 very small adjustment I just made there. But all that's going to do is ensure this contacts the seat a little earlier, so it'll start closing the seat at a lower level in the bowl, because it is possible that we just have been getting lucky and it was right on that borderline. But all right, we're back in. Float's hitting the seat. We'll put our car back together very quickly. I'm going to reuse this gasket for now. I'll cut a new one later. But since the fuel shouldn't be up to this level anyway, it shouldn't cause a major leak, just to get the truck back under cover for the night, and we'll cut a gasket a different day. All right, let's put it back together here. See if we have been successful. We do have to make sure our step-up pump and the needle get lined back up. Needle in the jet, step-up pump back in its well there. You can feel the step-up pump going in. Just want to make sure that needle for the jet back here also finds its home. Feels like it's all in place. got good movement. We should be good. Looks like those are all back in just fine. Tight. Get our fuel line tightened back up here. Oh, and our dust cover. Don't want to forget that. Keep things nice and clean in there. All right, carbs back together. We're tightened down. I believe we found the problem being some dirt in the needle and seat on the intake or the input side for the fuel here on the carb. We're back together. Linkages are hooked back up, so let's start, or hopefully start, and see if our repair was good enough to not be flooding out the engine now. All right. For some reason, the video camera cut off, but it appears we have been successful. Truck started, cleared off the cylinders and all the extra fuel that had dumped in there, and went back to idle. It's fine. We're not dumping fuel everywhere, so it just goes to show you that little bitty piece of dirt that was on the end of my finger, maybe another piece that has gone through, but something that small, because the needle and seat itself is so small, can be just enough to get in there and lodge in and flood out the carburetor, basically keeping the valve from shutting itself off when it needs to and dumping too much fuel. So I think we're good. We'll get our air breather back on, get buttoned up for the night, and be glad that it was a simple, easy fix that wasn't too big a deal to get straightened out.